welcome back. Katie Kimball here from Kids Cook Real Food for what will probably be the second to last episode of the Healthy Parenting Connector series. If you remember a few weeks back, we did a celebratory 200th episode where I decided I would look back on my favorite interviews, those guests who I just carry with me. And maybe I'm still talking about something they taught me years ago, or maybe we're still using a strategy in our family, in my parenting or in my cooking. And you know what? I got to a certain point and there were so many that I realized I had to do a part B. I had to do a second clips episode. So if you want to dial back to the first one, episode 200 walks through my favorite interview guests from the first 100 episodes of the Healthy Parenting Connector. This episode is going to go from episode 101 to 200, or really all the way to the end. And I'll just reintroduce to you some of my favorite guests, some of the best advice for parenting and nutrition and health out there. First up, we've got Lenore Skenazy. She is the author of Free Range Kids and the founder of the nonprofit Let Grow movement. I love listening to Lenore's straight talking and her fantastic stories. We're going to talk about what it means to raise confident children, to take beneficial risks. In the interview, we talk about why we must let our kids climb trees, walk to the store, and yes, use sharp knives.
The world is theirs, and we keep locking them in as if they're inanimate objects and don't need fresh air and don't need adventure and don't need to learn how to cross the street. So what do you get if you can let your child have some independence? You get a more independent child. And, one of the things that we've been noticing over the last generation is a steady uptick in the number of kids with anxiety and depression. And I would feel anxious if I'd been told that everything is too dangerous for me. Don't go out there. Let mom do it. You're going to cut off your finger. Really, how many fingers have gotten cut off? I would really be curious to hear. I would like to see a museum of all the children's fingers that cut off. But for kids cutting their own cucumbers, it would be an empty museum. There's something called the internal locus of control. And I hate sounding like an expert, but that's the feeling of like that you have some control over your life, that you're not micromanaged. You have some agency. And when you're depressed and anxious, that internal locus of control is small. And when somebody is doing everything with you or for you all the time, the message you're getting is that you can't handle that. And so that is a depressing thought. So if you want your kids, and not that there's an exact formula, like if you give them 30% more independence, they will be 30% less anxious. It doesn't work that way. But most parents, when they think back on their childhoods and what they loved doing, I ask, was your mom with you? And everybody, bursts into laughter. No, of course not. I was climbing a tree. I was down at the creek. I walked to the mall. And so, giving that to your kids is something that will accrue to their benefit, but also yours. Guess what? Some free time. Hey, you don't have to be high-fiving everything. You don't have to be there. You don't have to be biting your nails because they seem to be doing things poorly or arguing with a friend. If you're not there, they'll figure it out. Our slogan is so Let Grow is the organization. And our slogan is, when adults step back, kids step up. And that's what we're talking about. Future proofing is a phrase from the world of engineering. And when you're about to build something that's very expensive, say a factory, you want to make sure that like when the future comes and suddenly we're using robots instead of people, or what used to take an entire room now takes something the size of, a water bottle, that you haven't just wasted all your money. And so you try to make it thinking ahead. How flexible can it be? How many different things can it handle? And that's what you want your kid to be too. You want them like just teaching. There's a really great book called Range. Remember, every book you buy should have the word range in it, whether it's range or free range kids. Anyways, he talks about like you can raise, with a little bit of luck, a chess prodigy if all you teach them is chess. But then they get to, the real world, and how do they get a job? How do they make small talk? How do they go to a dance and enjoy themselves? If you've just trained them in one thing, they are not future proof. Similarly, I feel like school is great at teaching academic things, but what about the ability to come up with something fun to do? What about the ability to make a friend? What about the ability to solve an argument? These are things that you learn through play and through modeling through. And so we just have to get outside the mindset that only academics matter and only who you are as a student matters. And so the Let Grow project in schools, first of all, shows kids that, like, even if you're failing at spelling, you're the kid who learned how to ride a bike, and good for you, or you came in with the muffins that you made. That is very cool. So there's more to you. You are better able to face the future because you are so multifaceted.
Next up from episode 114 is my dear friend Amy McCready. Amy of Positive Parenting Solutions has been working with me since before Kids Cook Real Food was even founded. Way back when I was just blogging at Kitchen Stewardship, Amy McCready and I partnered, and I would share her incredible webinars with my audience. And I learned so much. I mean, I'm a teacher, I'm a trained educator. I read all the parenting books, and I still do not regret going to Amy's webinar probably 10 times, 5 times. I don't know. I've heard her 5 hours many times. And they're part of what I do. They're part of how, I teach my kids. And the way Amy talks about the differences between punishment, consequences, and discipline is key to being a really effective parent. I was going to say good parent, but it's not about grades, right? We want to be effective. We want to raise kids who we're proud to send off into the world. Here's Amy.
It's looking backwards or looking forward. So, we talk about the difference between punishment and discipline. So punishment is very backwards focused, right? Like you're getting punished for something that you did in the past. Or maybe there's the threat of punishing you in the future, but that does not work for long-term behavior change. And discipline is totally different. It's all about teaching, training, and helping the child be successful in the future. So everything that we do is focused on that forward discipline rather than punishing for the past. Back to sort of what is positive parenting, that's one of the biggest shifts that we have to make, because we as parents want to control all the power. And because we think we know better, because of course we have age and wisdom and experience and all of that. But if we can transition to giving our kids more power, more control in age appropriate ways over their own world, they're going to feel that sense of power in positive ways, and they won't have to fight us for power. We're going to have less back talk. We're going to have less struggles, less fighting over every little thing. So much of that is that kids just don't have enough age-appropriate, legitimate power that they can exercise in different aspects of their life.
I could listen to Amy all day. I tell you what, she and I will just never stop working with each other. We're always trying to find new ways to partner up and share the resources that each of us bring to our awesome audience of families. Next up, just one episode later in 115, I had the great honor of interviewing the author of Kid Food, Bettina Elias Siegel, and we bonded on the fact that there should be no such thing as kids' food or kids' menus. And the clip that I've chosen to share with you is when she begins to talk about highly processed food, because the more she dug into what we're feeding our kids, the more she realized where some of the real evils lie.
So another piece that I didn't mention is there especially when we're talking about packaged kid food, a huge element of the marketing is this idea of like fun and entertainment and excitement. That's when you think about it. How is a kid's yogurt different from an adult yogurt, or how is a kid's frozen meal that different from an adult frozen meal? One issue is there tends to be more sugar when we're marketing to kids, but really then after that it becomes all about the packaging, the marketing, the cartoon character. So we're sort of selling kids this notion that their food has to be this kind of like entertaining, exciting experience,
Right.
which really is sapping the joy out of eating just healthy, delicious food, without those sort of externalities. But at any rate, I want to be really clear. It's not like I'm condemning pasta and chicken nuggets and tacos and corn dogs. Those are all foods that we can all enjoy in moderation. What I'm really focusing on in the book, and I open the book with an introductory note to make this very clear. What I'm really concerned about is highly processed food, or what others call ultra processed food. And I won't go into the specific definition, but we're really talking about food that has been taken to the far end of the processing spectrum. processing can be drying food and cooking food, and peeling a carrot is processing. We're talking about the stuff way at the other end of the spectrum. And if I had, made this case 10 years ago, it might have sounded like, oh, she's just kooky and is worried about words she can't pronounce in the ingredient list. There are now just a growing number of incredibly compelling studies showing a very clear correlation between diets high in ultra-processed food and a whole host of diseases and obesity and those associated diseases. So we may not fully understand the mechanisms, but it's very clear that too much of that highly processed food really does have a negative impact on our health. And so that's what we're concerned about. And that's why it could be, problematic to just throw open the pantry or throw open the supermarket and say to kids, here, what do you want? We certainly want to give kids choices, but it's important for parents to put some parameters around those choices.
In all my time interviewing, there are some people whose interviews I love because of their content. There are some people whose interviews I love because just their spirit and their energy and their personality fills me up. And then there are some guests I love because they're so good at pulling out a little research or statistics, and they just feel super pro. Michelle Borba does all of these things. Her content is fantastic. She's so easy to listen to. She talks fast, which I like, give me more information. Yes, quickly, please. And she just has these little anecdotes and statistics and research. She's absolutely super pro. She's the author of many books. And in this episode, number 121, we talk about her book, Thrivers, which is 7 characteristics she's identified that help kids and teens thrive. So check out this little clip about the number 2 trait and also some great news about all these 7 traits of thrivers.
Empathy is number 2. Harvard Business Review named it as the top employability factor right now.
Wow.
Being able to get along with others. What our kids are doing when they go off to college is they're no longer wanting a roommate because they don't have the social skills to get along. That was prior to the pandemic. So you're going to see in this book packed research that says why it matters. But the other thing it's going to give you is, so how do we do it? So what do I do tonight or tomorrow that isn't going to cost me a dime, but I can dig in and help my kid be more of a shiner and not of a struggler?
Yes. Well, absolutely. And, you identify something you call the multiplier effect.
Yeah.
Which, as someone who loves multitasking and being efficient, I love that. You got to explain that to us.
Well, there was my aha moment when I was writing it. I kept going the same thing. Which of these traits is most important? And I began to realize something, because the other thing is parents kept asking me, which one should I start with? You start with your child's strength. That's why you go to the introduction and you identify what he's good at. And then you say, okay, what does he need right now? Because everything is also filtered in here from sandbox to prom. So it's never too late. You can do it at any age.
Aww.
The fascinating thing is I discovered is that you thrive more when you have not one trait, but multiple traits. It doesn't mean you have to have all 7. But 2 is better than 1. 3 is better than 1. And here's the other thing is, if you have 1 like self-confidence and then you learn perseverance, self-confidence multiplies. So it becomes the multiplier effect, because now the kid not only has self-confidence, but he has the skill to persevere. So that's going to really boost his self-confidence. You've got self-control plus perseverance plus self-confidence. You got an unstoppable kid. You've got self-control plus empathy plus integrity. You got a social change maker that's out to change the world and won't give up. So that's what we're looking at. Find it out. And don't think you have to do this month. You've got a womb to tomb scenario. It's never too late to start. The sooner you begin, the better. But you just keep stretching your child like a rubber band. Keep stretching without snapping. And that's what you want, because then your kid is going to be able to thrive without you someday.
Don't you just love listening to Michelle? She is a return guest. So if you love her, search up both of her Healthy Parenting Connector episodes. This was the first one, and she's got another one later on in the seasons. Tina Bryson is one of those authors whose book I read first, and then I chased her down. Please, 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 can I interview you? You're so wise. You're so fascinating, right? So I was incredibly honored to get a chance to sit down with Tina Bryson. If you know her, you love her. If you don't know her, look her up. Get all of her books from the library, as well as anything that her co-author has written. And in this clip, in this episode, we talk a lot about the brain. That's where Tina shines, is how children's brains work, how the left and right sides of our brains need to be integrated. And when they are disintegrated, the kids or adults fall apart. We disintegrate. And so she teaches how to reintegrate the two halves of the brain so that we are actually parenting with brain science. This clip is about connecting and redirecting, and the best way basically to calm a child who has, so to speak, flipped their lid and are completely melting down and having a tantrum. Here's Tina.
In that moment, we need to connect and redirect. This is the first strategy in the whole brain child, and it's the framework for all of no drama discipline. So first we want to the thing that reintegrates the brain the fastest is safety and connection. So keep in mind too that, one of the things that happens when our lids flip is that we are having a threat response in our nervous system. So we're acting as if some dangerous thing has happened. Our threat circuitry gets activated. So we go into fight, flight, freeze, collapse, which is why, by the way, why it's easier for us to soothe our children and be nurturing when they're physically hurt. Because when someone's in a threat state and in a reactive state, it's contagious. So it can really activate us. It's harder for us to tap into that nurture, which is, again, why knowledge is power. It's good to remind ourselves in that moment before we walk into interaction to say, my child needs help right now, because you're going to respond really differently if you're like, my kid's having a stress response and they need support, versus he's doing this to make me mad and I can't believe he's doing this to me again. You're going to respond really differently. So connection is as the quickest way to get the brain back into connection as well. And so what we're going to do is think about empathy and using, if your kid's in a right hemisphere mode, you're like, okay, I got to use my right hemisphere. I'm going to connect right brain to right brain. That means I'm going to use a lot of nonverbal stuff. I'm going to use touch unless that's dysregulating for your child. Keep in mind individual differences. Some kids do not want to be touched when they're dysregulated, or it can be dysregulating, particularly if they're on the spectrum or have a sensory processing challenge.
Sure.
But touch, tone of voice, even how quickly you speak. If I say, oh, you're having a really hard time, like that sound, those are the right words, but the tone of voice isn't right and it's too fast. If I instead say, oh, you're having such a hard time, that's totally different from, I can see you're having a hard time. So it's really about how they felt in that moment. It's about connection and empathy.
My next favorite is an interview that I do think of often because I see my guest running and walking in our neighborhood. Rob Hughes is one of my neighbors, and he's a serial entrepreneur. He's a coach of other entrepreneurs, and he's just a great dad. So we decided to have fun and do an episode where he takes what he does in his entrepreneurial life with what he does in his family life and merge them so that he's giving you parenting coaching via an entrepreneur. It's super cool. And one of the reasons that this is making the clip show, that this is one of my favorites, is first of all, because I just love Rob. He is a great speaker. He's a great storyteller, and he's got a heart for his kids, his family, and all families really. But also I still remember getting a very, very heartfelt email from one of our listeners saying, like, this made such an impact in her life and in her mindset. And she was just overwhelmed by how much Rob Hughes had helped her. So here's a little bit from Rob about goals and goal setting as parents and helping your kids set realistic goals.
We could spend a whole podcast episode talking about goal setting, but there's one tip I want to leave you with here. And that's the idea of lead and lag measures.
Okay.
Lead and lag measures. So both are goals that you can set. An example of a lead measure, if it was a health goal, might be diet and exercise. A lag measure would be, did I lose weight? That's the outcome. So think inputs and outputs. Okay. So if you set a goal on an output, you're going to live your entire life being frustrated and discouraged. So if I say, I have to lose 10 pounds, I got to lose 10 pounds, and then I succumb to temptation and I don't know diet and exercise and I fall off the wagon, I'm just going to give up and never set resolutions again. Or if I say, I've got to improve my relationship with my kids this year, and that's my goal, but that's where it stops, I'm going to live my life frustrated every time we have a disagreement and an argument. So instead of setting your goals on lag measures or outputs, let me encourage you to look at the other side of that same coin and take a look at the lead measures, the things that are actually within your control. So if you want to set a goal to have a better relationship with your children, think about setting a metric or an idea, an intentionality about how many date days are we going to take together? Or are we going to take our children out for breakfast? You can control taking your child out for breakfast 2 days a month. So think about the intentional lead measure that you can set and focus, put your focus and energy there.
Right? He's so fun, isn't he? My next favorite clip is from Phyllis Fagel. She is a counselor and a middle school expert, right? She was in middle school, works in middle schools with middle schoolers. They're kind of like, you know, the kryptonite, the age group that a lot of people don't want to touch. But what Phyllis says is that middle school is the last and best time as parents to really connect emotionally with our kids. And middle school is a critical time for development and a critical time, to be honest, to get our parenting right and to get our words right. So many things that Phyllis Fagel taught in this interview still play through my head. It was very hard to choose a clip to share with you. This is definitely an interview that you should watch in full if you have a child anywhere between the ages of like 11 and 15, or an older teen who still seems stuck in the middle school brain sometimes, which, by the way, many people are. Even adults, I think, have some middle school brain sometimes. But a lot of our kids who are older, you know, right now at the end of 2023, when I'm recording this, are actually stuck in a little bit of middle school brain because of the setbacks they experienced in COVID with just the weird schooling being at home and the socializing being all awkward and different. But some of them are still stuck in the middle school brain. So watch Phyllis Fagel's full interview. Get both of her books. They're awesome. She is another return guest that I just interviewed this fall again. But here's the clip about the imaginary audience.
Middle schoolers are really aware of what's called the imaginary audience. I think everyone is staring at them. I actually had a girl
I
in
still
here.
have that.
I know, but it's a lot better than it is for them. I had a sixth grader in here the other day, and she was showing me her arm and the arm hair. And she was like, I feel like so embarrassed. I just want to tweezers. I want to pull out my arm hair because it's so dark and awful. And I am not lying when I say I didn't see any arm hair. And I don't have the best vision, but I really am 100% sure that there was nothing aberrant at all about her arm hair. And I explained the whole imaginary audience to her. And I said, I know it feels like everyone's staring at you, but really everyone is just thinking about themselves. There really is no such thing as, you know, the imaginary audience is called an imaginary audience for a reason. And she said, I don't care what you call it, it's there. It's just really hard for them. And so that can show up in a lot of ways. They might not want to try out for a play or speak up in class with virtual learning. A lot of kids didn't want to be on the camera. Even like texting a friend, a new friend or somebody that they want to hang out with can be a really big social risk. And so what we can do as parents is to really help them come up with smaller goals, smaller little bite-sized risks that they can take, because that is how you build their confidence, by having them try something that's manageable and see that it goes well, and then they're willing to take another step.
We are flying way ahead from episode 134 to episode 150, and I want you to meet my dear friend Alyssa Arnheim. She is a fantastic mama, and she really focuses on gut health. I can't tell you actually how many times I have referred back to this tip that she's going to teach you about gut health and sauerkraut juice in particular. I want you to hear it from Alyssa, and then I'm going to come back and share what happened in our family when I implemented this strategy.
Introducing fermented vegetables. And that may seem like a super crazy leap for anyone to make. And it works really, really well. So you have a couple of options. You could do it sneaky like, or you can do it just like straight up, here we go. If you're going to be straight up, here we go, totally transparent about it, you'll just go to the store. You can make your own. It's super simple, but it's really easy to go to the store, find some raw fermented sauerkraut or raw fermented pickles. In the refrigerator section, they have live organisms, live friendly bacteria in them. So they need to be refrigerated, not on the shelf, not packed in vinegar. And bring it home, put it on the dinner table, and
For 2 weeks, every night, everyone eats a little bit.
All right, so I did two things that Alyssa recommended. One, we attempted the 2-week challenge where she said, put a bite of sauerkraut on your kid's plate every day for 2 weeks. Try to get them to at least like smell it, lick it. They don't have to eat it or even put it in their mouth. Me and follow through are not best friends. So we probably did it for 5 days. I do it every so often when I remember, because I don't remember to eat my own sauerkraut at every meal, right? Sometimes I'm just buzzing. It is not in my habit stack yet. However, okay, so we tried that. And then the other thing I did was I did put sauerkraut juice into our condiments, our for sure ketchup and mustard, maybe mayonnaise, maybe barbecue sauce. I don't remember. The weird thing is, a month or two later, my oldest son, who was late high school at the time, said, this is so weird. I actually kind of like sauerkraut now, and I don't know why. That's almost an exact quote. I like Cheshire Cat just kind of sucked it up, and I'm thinking, I know why. So that was really cool. It only worked, so to speak, on one of my 4 kids, but I also wasn't extremely consistent. And so this is a great reminder. I've got sauerkraut in the fridge. I'm going to go put it in my condiments. And of course, the 18-year-old is editing this video, so now he's going to know. Paul, don't tell anyone, okay? 152 is Edwina Kennedy. She is a fantastic dietitian mom, and she really helps the young kids, the parents of young kids, the toddlers, begin their eating routines correctly. So we did a whole interview on feeding toddlers, and this little clip is some fascinating information on the pouches and why those might not be the best way to feed your kids.
I think the pouches are great for different circumstances, but sometimes we just become so dependent on them. And again, your toddler really needs that extra exposure. They really need to see, to touch, exactly, to experience it on every level with their 5 senses. And when you have a food that's hidden in a pouch and again just goes straight into their mouth, they're missing out on the smell, and they're missing out on the touch, and they're missing out on all of that experience. So it's really not helping get them to where we want them to be.
If there is one topic that I probably should have more interview guests on, it's ADHD. I think we have like 2.5 episodes out of over 200 that specifically focus on ADHD. And I say 2.5 because one is like part anxiety, part ADHD. We just don't hit it that much. But there are over 6 million kids in America who are formally diagnosed with ADHD, and it's a really big deal. Donna Kay is an fantastic expert when it comes to ADHD. She takes sort of an integrative approach where, okay, meds are fine. I'm not going to tell you to get rid of your meds, but what if you could mitigate some of your kids' symptoms with diet and lifestyle? And what if you could mitigate the fact that most kids on ADHD meds add more meds as they get older, and sometimes they have to add meds to counterbalance the symptoms and side effects caused by the other meds? What if you could mitigate some of that and dial back the meds and have a child who feels better, behaves better, and enjoys their life more? That's Donna's mission, and I just want to share a short story that she shared about what happens when the whole family makes some dietary changes together. I love this so much.
What I teach and what I preach, it's not just aligned with ADHD. It helps everyone. I've got families that do this together for their child in the program, and the parents are just amazed at how much they feel better, how much all of a sudden their cholesterol has dropped into normal ranges. I had one mum who had really, really bad hip inflammation, and there were days she couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't walk up her stairs in her house, and she was waiting for the doctor's appointment to give her medication to help that and to also find out the source of the inflammation. So anyway, I think 10 weeks into my program, the doctor rang and said, we've got an appointment for you. And she's like, I don't need to come anymore. The pain's gone. The inflammation has reduced so much, and I don't need to come anymore. And that was all because we removed the top 3 inflammatory foods and we started feeding her body. Her pain's gone. So, I talk about ADHD, but everything that I'm talking about today can help most people.
And don't you also love her Australian accent? I get to hang out with Donna every so often in person, and I could just listen to the dag blasted accent all day. I love it so much. Let's move on to Beth O'Hara. She is one of my favorites, partly because every time we mention her topic on social media, like the graph of engagement does this, whoop, up and then down, right? Like people are really interested right now in mold and in the effects of mold. And Beth has a really rough personal history story of falling into very, very bad disease and nearly probably losing her life and having to figure out for herself, because doctors kind of gave up on her, what was going on and how to climb out of that. So she is a mast cell activation syndrome expert. Mold goes hand in hand with mast cell activation issues typically. And so here she's talking a little bit about why in the world is mold so much of a bigger problem now? Has it always been a big problem, or is it really worse in our modern society? Here's Beth.
We have had mold. I mean, we know that mold is described in the Bible. We know that there were protocols for if you saw mold growing on your home, what to do. And we've lived with mold. Mold's been on the planet, as long as the planet's been here almost. It's been here for a long time. But what has happened is multifactorial. One, we're exposed to more toxins than we've been exposed to ever in the history of humanity.
Okay.
And those toxins pass through the placenta, through the cord blood, through the breast milk. So babies today are born with hundreds of toxins already in their bodies, not starting at the same starting point. And that disrupts it disrupts us genetically, and it disrupts our detox capacities. So not at the same starting point as our grandparents or great-grandparents who were when they were exposed to mold.
Okay, because we have a higher like toxic body burden overall before we even are exposed to the mold. So we're weaker and more sensitive.
Exactly.
Yikes.
And mold will pass through the placenta and the breast milk. So mold can pass from mother to child. So we have that. So if the mother had an exposure, plus our buildings are different. There's a wonderful quote I love by a psychologist named Claire Graves, which said, when we solve problems, we create new problems.
Yeah.
And then we have to solve those problems. And solving those problems, we create new problems. So we had the energy crisis in the 70s, and energy got really expensive. We started getting more environmental awareness and saying, we can't just keep burning all these fossil fuels.
Right.
So we solved that. A way that we've been working on solving that is building buildings tighter. And that has some really good benefits, but it caused new problems. And some of the new problems included holding more moisture in the walls and humidity. And mold loves humidity. You don't even have to have leaks, although leaks and water damage will cause mold growth.
Yeah.
Mold's always here. It's just, does it have the right conditions? Now we have better conditions for mold in buildings and schools.
Sometimes I remember exactly what my interview guest said because we're consistently using it in our family. Sometimes I look back and I think, oh my goodness, I need to watch this whole interview again, because now I do remember that guest said that thing and I didn't integrate it well into my family, and we really, really need to. Dr. Janine Janot talks about the disintegrating student, the kids who are high achievers, who have lots of talent, who are really smart, and then literally fall apart. They disintegrate. Why is this happening? Why is this happening at a higher rate? And what can we do to help our disintegrating students and prevent it from happening to our poor tweens and teens in the first place? One tip that she's going to give you today is about where your kids should and should not study. And this is one that my teen who has trouble sleeping is going to be hearing in the next day or two, because I'm so glad I looked back at this fantastic interview. Here's Janine.
As far as the achievement culture goes, it's going to be a huge ask to get that change. It's going to be very, very, very slow. So my advice to parents on that front is to basically acknowledge the culture in your family. So say, hey, so here's the reality, whether you're homeschooling or in a public school or in a private school, there's a reality about what the expectations are in the culture, that academic achievement culture. So put that on the table, with your kid and talk about, well, so here's what, we hear, and here's what we're told, and here's what we think we should be doing, and here's what we think success is. What is success for us? What is success for you? Is taking 8 APs something that you should be doing? For so many kids, that's not realistic, and it's not helpful for that to be hanging over a family's head or a student's head. just because that's the expectation. So redefining what is success in our family for our kids is monumental. When our kids are disintegrating, it's not because they're not smart anymore. It's because they have skill deficits and counterproductive behaviors in those 7 categories. So that's like huge good news for everybody. So it's, for the kid to know, A, you're as smart as you ever were. That you never needed skills like these. You've never had to use them. So once they can understand, oh, that's the problem, that's huge. Because of virtual school and because just the nature of how students are being students these days, I think there's a really good tip in the book. I call it remake your bed. And I tell all students this. I always find out, do you study in bed? Do you do schoolwork in bed? And oftentimes I'll hear, yeah, because it's comfortable, whatever. But there is a really good reason not to do that. And that's because our brain actually makes associations. And so if we really should only sleep in bed. Our kids should only be sleeping in bed. So if they're doing something else in bed, like, their schoolwork, which they don't like, it's causing them stress and anxiety, the body actually can become conditioned to hold on to those feelings in a way that when they go to bed to go to sleep, their body's triggered to feel that anxiety at some level that was associated with the schoolwork.
All right, Dr. Janine Janot, she knows what she's talking about. Noelle Foy is very similar, in a very similar kind of field, talking about our kids and our teens and anxiety. Noelle worked with kids for many decades and has now left the schools, but is still teaching, as most of us educators do. Noelle's first interview of 2, because she's another one of my repeat guests, talked about both anxiety and ADHD and how those can go hand in hand. Remember, I said there's 2.5 episodes. That's it on ADHD. This is one of them. And what Noelle is going to share with you in this clip is something that parents sometimes do with and for our kids who are experiencing anxiety that we have very good intentions about, but we need to stop. Here's Noelle.
We talk about anxiety. What I see happening sometimes is we think that kids who are anxious cannot experience any kind of discomfort. That they really need to know everything before they can step into something new. So we know that kids with anxiety tend to really have challenges with uncertainty, right? And all anxiety isn't bad. Some, anxiety is actually designed to protect us. So we want to pay attention, but sometimes, for example, kids with ADHD or kids who have an anxiety disorder, their stress response is activating more often and they're getting these alarm signals a lot more often. So what I have seen is that sometimes folks feel that we need these kids to always feel comfortable and that we have to overly reassure them and overly protect them. And what I see is a lot of rescuing and doing the thinking for the child and doing the work for them too much. And then what we're doing is we're depriving the kids of any opportunities to build skills and accept that I do have to learn to experience a little bit of discomfort. Let's say it's the test you were talking earlier about. We are not going to eradicate anxiety. And sometimes we might want to do that, but that's just not realistic. We can learn to tolerate and manage the anxiety.
My friend Andrea Davis is up next. I feel like Andrea and I are friends, although I just realized we've never actually got to hang out in person. Going on my bucket list. I need to spend time with Andrea Davis. She is the founder of Better Screen Time, and she and her information is so needed. It is so much more needed right now. And as we continue to move forward into our technological postmodern society, Andrea is going to help you take a slow tech approach to use tech training wheels to hold back on those phones and that social media until your kids are quite a bit older, probably, than you think maybe they're ready. And she's got the research to back it up. And unfortunately, the research right now in this day and age is continuing to pile up about how detrimental screens and social media in particular are for our kids and our teens. If you have kids who have a tablet, who have a smartphone, or you're thinking about getting them a tablet or a smartphone, in other words, pretty much if you have kids who are over 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, You must watch both of these and then immediately follow Andrea on social media. If you are on social media, if you're not, don't get on just for this. Get on her email list then, because everything she shares, I'm like, I needed to know that. My friends need to know that. I need to remember this. I got to talk to my teens about this, or I have to not let my teens do that. Such important information. And I'm going to stop talking because you need to hear this from Andrea.
Having limits and boundaries is healthy for our kids. They can't do that themselves because of two reasons. Their brain isn't fully developed, and these apps have been designed to keep them hooked. It's called persuasive design. And again, it's there for all of us on social media or wherever we're using a screen. So those two things alone tell us that kids really can't self-regulate on a screen, and that it does take us as parents to step in and to provide some boundaries. And I think that really the only way our kids would just completely go off the deep end is maybe if we are too controlling and we are just completely limiting and shutting down everything.
All right, my friends, we're getting there. We have 3 left. Episode 179 is with Jennifer Kalari. And I first heard Jennifer on the Broken Brain podcast with Drew Perot. I was sitting on a plane and she talks about this incredible analogy of a pilot and the pilot asking too many questions of his passengers and connecting that with picky eaters and short order cooking. It blew my mind. It's so perfect. And I give her credit every time, but I always use that in my No More Picky Eating challenges. So I was just tickled. I was so tickled that when I said, Jennifer, can I interview you? She said yes, and she gave me her time. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago from recording this Clips episode, she invited me onto her podcast, and I got to share my training on picky eating through the SOS approach to feeding. And she was like, blown away by what I had to say. I thought this is so cool. It is so cool to get like wise, fascinating people together who love learning and who interact with parents and kids and learn from that too. So Jennifer and I, we're going to continue working together. I certainly hope. But here is a little clip from her about something, a technique you can use to help connect really well with anyone. It can be kids, it can be a spouse, it can be a friend, and on the best free drug, in air quotes, that can help you be a better parent and connect with your kids.
It's free and you don't need a prescription and you can't overdose on it and you can't run out of it. That's oxytocin. Oxytocin is a very powerful reward chemical, probably one of the most powerful ones, if not the most powerful one. There's also serotonin. What oxytocin does is it speeds up neuroplasticity, so it helps that little brain grow, actually any brain grow. It strengthens the immune system. That's pretty important in today's world. It mitigates and inhibits cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone. That's what causes us to get anxious and worry and stress and gives us stomach aches and makes our heart race and puts us into fight or flight. Oxytocin lowers cortisol, which is really, really important. Well, let's say you have a little child and they were, I don't know, at the playground or something, and they came home and said, oh, and they're 5. Julia loves me and I'm so happy, but then I got really sad because it turns out Julia loves Josh. And you do that, right? You're like, oh, that's so cute. This has nothing to do with what your child is feeling. Okay, they're feeling really sad about that. And so when our affect doesn't match their affect, they're either going to feel invalidated, hurt, misunderstood, or they're going to up the ante. No, you don't understand, mommy. She loves Josh and she told me she was going to marry me. And it's still the cutest thing you've ever heard in your life, but there's still not this match. Now, you don't want to go overboard and go, what? Julia loves Josh? That's terrible. That's a whole other thing. That's weird. Don't do that. But what you genuinely want to do is step into that child's experience. He's only 5 and he thought Julia loved him. And so you want to be like, oh, you really thought she loved you and you had this lovely time together. And like, you want to just be present. Right? You don't make it about you and you don't overreact either. You just have a moment where your child feels deeply understood.
I have worked with Renee Harris of Made on Lotion since 2010, since literally the second year that I was blogging. We have gotten to meet up in person. I love her to pieces. She and her husband, Jonathan, have 9 kids, and they have such a cool, unique philosophy on raising and homeschooling and teaching their kids. My husband and I both have gotten to work with some of their now becoming adult, like late teen, early adult kids, and they're incredible. they're really, really good at what they do because Jonathan and Renee helped them find their passion early and get good practice time. So this episode is absolutely fascinating if you have kids about 10 or up. And we're going to share just a little clip about preparing your kids for their future.
You want to avoid that sudden exposure. You know, you invested all this time in your talent, and then suddenly you're looking for a market for it. So that huge discouragement that can come after high school, they kind of have to abandon it because they have created no path into the market where they can adapt to it gradually. So I think that's important too.
And they pivot too. So, you know, with him, that his huge Instagram portfolio of what he had been doing led him to work for a knife making company in the Bay Area because they saw that he had, without no education in the school system, but they saw that he had all of this experience.
So now you need to find an opportunity for your child to start acting. So if I'm talking to someone who's got a teen, or I'm talking to the teen, now if they're on the younger side, you know, there's some little jiggling you have to do because sometimes it depends on the maturity. But if they're, you know, 14 or 15, usually what I say is like, is there a way they can make $5 off of this interest that they have in one of the tools by this weekend? Now, it may take them all day to make $5. That's not the point. It's like, you know, you've got to, I mean, it's something as simple as like, you've got a guitar, you've been taking all these guitar lessons, you're still not bringing value to people. We're the ones paying the teacher, right? You're not bringing value to other people. Where could you this weekend? So you figure he's not driving yet. Okay, we've got a little local lake club. Half the people are retired. Go out there and see if you can make $5 in donation, right?
Finally, last but not least, Chef James Berry is in episode 193. Now, just because he's last doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean that others aren't good. It just means that certain interviews stick in my head. Chef James Berry talks about in this interview how he was a picky eater until his 30s when he went to culinary school and kind of forced himself to eat everything he made, and now he loves all food. James Berry is the founder of Pluck, which is an organ-based seasoning. And in this clip, he's going to talk a little bit about the importance of the umami sense of flavor and what microdosing high nutrient dense foods like organ meats can do for a kid's gut and body and brain and their picky eating tendencies. It's absolutely fascinating. Chef James Berry.
I just heard this story recently, which is when I reached out to you. A practitioner was working with a client whose daughter was spectrum. Now, a lot of spectrum kids are very tactile with their food. They're very specific with flavors, and they a lot of times have very limited diets because of that. Well, she was dealing with the practitioner's client. Her daughter would just not, it was eating like basically like 3 foods. And the parent was extremely nervous and worried because the child was not getting their nutritional needs met from these foods. And so the practitioner said, I want you to do one thing differently. I want you to just add Pluck to those 3 food, her meals, whatever you're giving her, just do that. So Pluck has organ meats in it. It's 5 freeze-dried powdered organ meats. It's liver, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, and then it's combined with spice and herbs. So what happens is you get a very umami seasoning that has all the organ meat nutrition in it, but it tastes really good because of the spices and herbs in it. It just tastes like any other seasoning. So no one would inherently know like, oh, there's organ meats in this. But what's key is that there is an umami forward flavor. And so this child started getting these umami flavors in her food. The parent then reported back to the practitioner, guess what? My child is starting to eat other foods now. And it's because their palate was now changing to actually welcome in these new flavors.
All right, my friends, that's it for me. We, again, are shifting the Healthy Parenting Connector video series into the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. We will still publish them as videos if you prefer to see or listen to your content on YouTube. But now, finally, you will get to put me and all these fascinating interview guests, plus new ones, into your ears and take us on a walk, take us on a drive, fold laundry, do dishes, all that stuff that you do when you are listening to your podcasts. And I absolutely can't wait. It's been an incredible first 200 plus episodes. I look forward to collecting for you more experts to help write your Healthy Parenting Handbook starting January 2024. For the second to last time, I'm Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food, signing off for the Healthy Parenting Connector.